In today's lecture, we'll once again see work of Margaret Mead to begin with. Let's have a look at one of her films.
The little disciples of the witch dance and prepare to receive the witch's instructions. This is the witch in her full supernatural paraphernalia, hairy legs, pendulous breasts, long fingernails, but without the mask that will turn her into a supernatural figure. Beside her is her daughter, who has been rejected by the king of the country. In revenge for the slight to her daughter, she is now training her little novices to spread pestilence and death. Kneeling in front of her, they answer her instructions on how to spread plague. They go off, and the next scene shows a pregnant woman among a group of people who have fled their plague-stricken village to wander the roads. This is a birth scene where the pregnant woman, played by a man, gives birth to a child while witches lurk about to steal the newborn child.
Students, you can also have a look at the extensive list of Margaret Mead work, where she has kind of made numerous films and wrote articles based on the concept, based on the discipline of visual anthropology. Now, as I was talking about that, times have changed, right? And therefore, the nature of anthropology has changed as well. So, for example, with the rise of the global commercial travel and introduction of more and more affordable video recording technologies, I mean, you can understand, right? Making a film was a privilege till a point of time. Today, you can make a film very well with the aid of your cell phone. And particularly in contemporary times, with AI coming to your aid as well, life has become very, very easy. So, be it taking pictures or be it making a film, all of it is available in the palm of your hand. So you can make a film with your own cell phone cameras and so on and so forth. Editing, which was also an Herculean task in the days when editing used to be in film, right? So the famous scissor, and you cut and you paste and so on and so forth. So as you can understand, it was coming from a very, very privileged position. At that point of time, of course, it was impossible for researchers to use filmmaking as a tool for research, right? And therefore, there was no question, or there were very, very few ethnographic films as a matter of fact. Right, but times have changed, video recordings have become affordable, and this is particularly true from 1970 onwards. And therefore, visual anthropology programs, labs, and centers started being established at this point of time. Various anthropological departments started having video labs, where they kind of collaborated and worked towards a sort of, be it ethnographic films, photographs, and so on and so forth. Of course, in contemporary times, it's very different because now there's also podcast and there's also curation and so many new media platforms social media has come into the ambit of anthropology. But I'll talk about it in a bit while. First, I would like to finish talking about the discipline of visual anthropology in general. So what happened was essentially it combined itself, right? These media analysis, film production, visual culture kind of combined itself with the earlier writing culture. Of course, there were debates around the power imbalance and the representational authority in ethnographic description and analysis, but visual anthropology has prompted important critiques of anthropological image making itself. However, this was a new visual experience, and the visual experience as a cultural practice came into surface with visual anthropology. So that's pretty much about that. Ethnography is essentially visual. Now, if I talk about ethnographic films in practice and theory, and of course, I already have shown you examples of Margaret Mead films, right? There are other films as well. I have already spoken in several of my lecture about Harjant Gill, right? Who also has written extensively too about visual anthropology and has made various ethnographic films as well.
Sikh is identified by the turban, because to me, this is the symbol of Sikhs. I have never thought of being without my hair and turban. In fact, I think I feel very odd.
Being a Sardar, you should be, very conscious about whatsoever you do. You can't be irresponsible anywhere, because people expect a level of wisdom out of you. And when we are in a teenage, nobody is in that situation that he can handle that particular level of wisdom.
ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਜ਼ਮਾਨਾ ਐਡਵਾਂਸ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਹਾਨੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਬੜੇ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਟਾਉਣ ਦਿੰਦੇ, ਉਹ ਬਹਾਨੇ ਲਾ ਲੈਂਦਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਜੀ ਸਿਰ ਦੁਖਦਾ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ, ਮੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਪੱਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੰਨ੍ਹੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ, ਐਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪੱਗ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੰਨ੍ਹਣੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ, ਮੈਂ ਕਾਲਜ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਮਜ਼ਾਕ ਉੱਡਦਾ, ਤੂੰ ਪੱਗ ਇਹੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬੰਨ੍ਹਦਾ। ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਈ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਵੀ ਹਾਂ ਵਾਲ ਕਟਾਉਂਦੇ, ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਲ ਕੱਟੇ ਹੋਏ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਪਸੰਦ ਨੇ।
ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਫੌਜ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਟਰਬਨ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਡ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਰਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਟਰਬਨ ਕਲੀਨਿਕ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਦਸਤਾਰ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਬੰਨ੍ਹਣੀ ਜਾਵੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਮਾਸ ਟਰਬਨ ਟਾਈਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਦਸਤਾਰਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਜਾਈਆਂ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਾਡੀ ਦਾ ਪਾਰਟ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਯੂ ਆਰ ਕਰਾਊਂਡ, ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ।
So basically, the idea is that the approach and aesthetic of observational cinema, which largely defined anthropology for a long period of time, this kind of brought into, became ethnographic films in the present times. So basically observational cinema, right, and became ethnographic films at present. Albeit there was a slight difference in terms of style and technique, but essentially the formal style of ethnographic films, the way in which ethnographic observations can be represented in and through films, and the power dynamics alternatively revealed and obscured by formal choices in filmmaking, continue to constitute the central issue in the ethnographic film theory. I wanted to talk about that the film theory, right, around or theoretical framework around ethnography was essentially based on the idea of observational cinema. Now, we spoke a lot about make ethnographic films, and then somehow it might look like, and of course we spoke a bit about photography, but that at this point it might look like that essentially is just these two, right? So essentially is just photography and just making films, which kind of comprise anthropology in general. However, of course, anthropology is much more, right? It's essentially a visual experience. It's essentially a visual experiment, but then this is visual experience experience and this visual experiment does not need to be limited by only idea of a full-fledged ethnographic film. So making a full-fledged ethnographic film, which say a film by Harjand Gill or others as well, is quite a privilege, right? You need a substantial amount of time, and more than time, actually technical expertise to make a complete film. And this brings me to today's lecture. I want to highlight a new framework which has been introduced inside the ambit of visual anthropology, and famously written by Samuel Gerald, Collins, Matthew Durrington, and Harjant Gill as multimodal anthropologies. Right? It's the same Harjant Gill, who is also the ethnography filmmaker. So it's not that they're the only one or they're the first one to introduce the idea, but multimodal anthropologies has kind of arrived has kind of brought the discipline, had brought something new to the discipline. So what exactly is multimodal anthropologies? But before I go to the definition, it's very simple, right? Right now I was speaking about that how anthropology or visual anthropology in today's date cannot be simply limited to, say, making a full-scale film, or it cannot be simply limited to photographs. You have to bring things like podcasts, you have to bring things like social media engagements, you have to bring things like curation, right? There can be multifarious ways how all of these media platforms can be brought under the ambit of anthropology. And this is exactly what the discipline is talking about, to expand the discipline and bring in all of these ideas in order to pursue anthropology, and not just pursuing but also exhibiting the anthropological work. And this is defined as the multimodal anthropologies, right? So many of the changes can be, these changes which essentially I'm talking about in the discipline of visual anthropology can be linked to three developments. And I'm quoting here that number one, the relative democratization and integration of media production. You all agree, right? In today's date, I can make a film. I mean, it's a common phenomenon that you can make a film. At the same time, you can release a podcast based on the dialogues of the film, right? So today, the very nature of inherent, or you can have still photographs, which are all around of that same film. So what I'm talking about is that media world can be produced around one text. So there's a sort of integration, and at the same point of time, there's also, media has become very democratic. This has happened because of social media platforms and so on and so forth. So democratization and integration of media production. The next is the shift towards engagement and the collaboration in anthropological research. So a lot of collaborative work is happening with regard to anthropological work. And the third is the dynamic role of anthropologists vis-a-vis both the profession and the communities in which they work. So it has become all very dynamic, both in terms of both the person who is engaging in the research as well as the subjects. Remember that essentially the idea behind any sort of anthropological research is to research the community, right? Which is a community in terms of how the community is functioning and so on and so forth. So together these changes suggest a new framework, and which is being called now the multimodal anthropology, by which we mean, and I wish to quote them here, you might note down, by which we mean not only an anthropology that works across multiple media, right? So it might look on the face very simple, that what is multimodal is simply that anthropology now works across media. Earlier it was just photographs, and then photographs, it came down to observational cinema, and then that's it, right? Then you came to full-length films, feature film, as in documentary films and so on and so forth. But it does not end there, right? So it talks about that on one hand, it might look like that's exactly what is multimodal anthropology, but it is well beyond that, and that's why they're saying that we mean not only an anthropology that works across multiple media, but one that engages in public anthropology and collaborative anthropology through a field of differently linked media platform. This is not, however, a decisive break from the past. Many of us in the sense, anthropologists, already practice work in the multimodal manner. So they're saying that it's something very large, right? So for example, it's not just that, oh, now I'm using a podcast also, or now I'm taking interviews and so on and so forth. So of course the ambit has increased, but I think what they also mean to say, it's also the dissemination of work, right, which was essentially earlier only academic papers, right? So now it's not just academic papers. At the same point of time, you can make a film, of course, you can do a curatorial work around your anthropological study, right? So you can create a podcast, and that you can create a website, right? Create a website which showcases that community which you are studying. So all of this is kind of now under the ambit of anthropological practices. Students, here there's a quiz for you now. So I have mentioned Harjant Gill couple of times, in fact several times. So who is Harjant Gill? There are 4 options for you. Is he a fiction film writer? Is he a scholar who practices or uses the method of content analysis? Is he a visual anthropologist? And your last option is he's a poet. The correct answer is scholar who practices or uses the method of content analysis. And on that note, let us watch one film. Of course, we are not going to watch the entire film, but a short snippet from one of his films called Macho Land.
While growing up, I realized there were certain kind of men I would not like to become. I would not like to become an uncle of mine who would beat my mother up. I would not like to become a senior of mine who would define himself by sodomizing a junior. I would not like to pull a gun on somebody because I have had a gun pulled on me. I know what fear feels like. If there is a situation of violence, I will resist picking the sword until I have nothing left but to pick the sword.
मेरा तो मेरे फादर ਦੀ ਏਜ ਦਾ 42 ਇਅਰਸ ਦਾ ਗੈਪ ਹੈ। ਜਦੋਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਬਰਥ ਹੋਇਆ ਮੇਰੇ ਫਾਦਰ 42 ਇਅਰਸ 올ਡ ਸੀ। ਮੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ 2 ਸਿਸਟਰਸ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ। ਮੇਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫਰੈਂਡਸ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਮੇਰੇ ਕਲਾਸਮੇਟਸ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਫਾਦਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦਾਦਾ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਏਜ ਦੇ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਮੇਰੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਜੋ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਟਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੁਢਾਪੇ ਦੇ ਸਹਾਰੇ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਟਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀਆਂ ਬੇਟੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਸਕਣ। ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਅਗਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਕੋਈ ਬੇਟਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਰਿਸਪੌਂਸਿਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੇਟੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਮੁਕਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਮੈਂ ਕੋਈ ਫ੍ਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ।
ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਵਾਲਾ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਛਿੜਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਰਜਿਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ, ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਉਹ ਟਾਸਕ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਲਾਈਫ ਦਾ, ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੁੜੀ ਨਾਲ ਫਿਜ਼ੀਕਲ ਰਿਲੇਸ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਖੀ ਇੰਨੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਹੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਵੀ। ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਇਮੇਜ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਯਾਰ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਛੱਕਾ ਹੈ, ਇਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਕੁਛ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ। ਮਤਲਬ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਗੇ ਟਾਈਪ ਦਾ ਉਹ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ।
Now, I was just talking about social media. So till now, I have only spoken about the practice part of it, right? So how do you pursue the study? You pursue the study by all of this, making a film, photographs, podcast, curatorial work, anything at all, which, I mean, there's endless scope. So you use any of the media platforms, right? However, there's other aspect to it also, actually 2 more aspects to it. So you know, right, that anthropology is a study of communities, right? Now, earlier, the idea of a community was only a physical community. However, you know that social media has also become an excellent platform where you can conduct a study. When I say conduct a study, doesn't mean only about that you conduct a study of a community which is completely based online. So for example, in one of my research, I was trying to look at Shah Rukh Khan's online fans, right? But however, even physical communities, right, who are not just placed in an online platform, the way how they interact and then kind of a lot of nuances can be studied through studying their social media interaction. So you look at the fact that now what is happening is these spaces, these media spaces, social media is also a media space, so these media spaces are also becoming object of study. At the same point of time, media is also becoming a platform for dissemination of work, right? Dissemination of work not just to the audience, but for the subject itself. So you make a film, you pass it on the social media, people look at that film, people of that community of which you have made the film, right? They also look at their work in these platforms. So it's a very fluid nature of content which is flowing from one media to another media, right? And of course, more and more use of these media platforms kind of requires, or kind of not requires, but then it kind of brings into its ambit collaborative work. So this kind of flow of the content, flow of the work, of your anthropological work across platforms, right, both from the making point of view to the object of study, to the distribution, this constant flow, which is kind of cannot be limiting, this is essentially quoted as multimodality. So this was an explanation of multimodality in simple language. So again, to read from the text which I am following, which is, as I have already stated before, Multimodal Anthropologies. On their way to producing anthropological media, anthropologists weave a complex skein of trace media behind them. From social media posts to relationship built with communities to hastily recording sound bites and photographs taken to help us remember specific details, to rough cuts and early edits of film, to varied exchanges and quid pro quo and arrangements where field researchers produce recordings, photographs, and films at the behest of the community. This is exactly what I was talking about. The trail of shared and collaborative media that our research and practices produce continues as a series of traces that the anthropological engagement, a network archive that twist around the final product of ethnography. So, in this age of accelerated media proliferation, these network forms of media are rendered more visible, and paradoxically, at the same time, they might seem ephemeral and even more permanent. So, this is what I was talking about, that it's a continuous trail which is kind of working. And, it's also high time. So we have spoken so much about multimodality, of what exactly it is and how what exactly what is the flow of these kind of work. But at the same point of time, this paper, which I am kind of referring to, also talks about that this is high time when anthropologists need to be educated in multimodality, which is essentially a work in progress. I really like the word work in progress, right? So a multimodal approach to teaching anthropological research method demands that we highlight that anthropology as the work of progress, right? So you're continuously creating content in any of these forms, right? So you continuously, even a small sound bite, that's also content. So it's a continuous work in progress that traverses multiple collaborative platforms, right? So all of these platforms are collaborative platforms. So collaborative research may occur. So it's a work in progress. Now, while the conventional educational experience, which will undoubtedly continue to privilege a finished edited media, as I was saying some time back, that a complete film, of course, you need funding to make a complete film, and if you need a certain amount of technical expertise and so on and so forth. Like the Harjant film, Harjant Gill's example, we saw the film. It's a kind of a good work in terms of technically also it's a good work. So that is kind of course, will have a privileged position and will of course be very, very welcoming. However, a multimodal approach to learning demands that the student think that indigenous media and social media, gallery shows, performance, design, apps, games, maker space, diagrams, even drawings, right? All of this is included in the ambit and not just a finished film and so on and so forth. And the dialogue and the exchange should be a continuous process. So it's not just that the film is over and then the paper is written alongside and it's over. So it has to be a continuous process. And to come to aid of this is something called Creative Commons, right? So we all know about Creative Commons. It's where you kind of give permission to use your work for educational purpose, and there are different degrees, right, of giving licenses of your work. So this open access, and what is open access? Anybody can access your work, like ChatGPT, for example, right? All of us are able to use the software. So this open access and Creative Commons licensing have generated new questions about the ethics of publishing our work behind paywall. So will future media participate in new and unknowing perspective? The last part of this lecture is multimodal scholarship circulation, right? So I have, of course, discussed all this, that book-length monograph, journal articles have been the common practice. Feature-length ethnographic films, for example, the one you saw for Harjand Gill has also become a common practice. However, what needs to be done now, or what is essentially the future according to the way in which this discipline needs to go, is that there has to be flow of ideas and scholarship which does not need to follow a familiar and a fairly narrow path, increasingly crowded path to publication. We all scholars know, right? So today we all know that there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure in terms of academia to publish, right? So this kind of makes it very limiting. Or then you make a feature-length film, you make a finished film, that itself brings a lot of challenges. So multimodal anthropology emerges partly out of these practitioners' frustration. Because when you have to only make a finished film, or when you have to only you can only publish your research with writing, this leads to a lot of frustration with inability of this limited venues to keep up with the innovation and the expansion in anthropology, right? And that's what exactly is happening. And to adequately reflect the changing landscape of anthropology, which we just spoke about, and the influence of emerging media technologies on anthropologists' everyday lives. So American anthropologists' endorsement of a more multimodal future should be seen as a commitment to the egalitarian of the scholarly production within our discipline. And as a matter of fact, any discipline, right? So they're saying that research discipline should kind of now bring all of these multimodal media platform into its ambit. It's high time for that. And of course, there are changes right now. So for example, as I've already discussed somewhere else as well, that in today's date, if you are using ethnography as your research method, then it's very much possible for you that even if you're doing a PhD dissertation, there are many universities which allow you to do a part of your dissertation in video form. So be it you make a film or any other form, but it's a video form, it's non-written format. So this itself kind of is a welcoming change for anthropologists in general. But of course, there's more to it, and there should be more to it. To end with, I will again go back to social media, because we all live in social media. So this is an attempt to combine the idea of research and social media, which looks like poles apart, right? Because social media often distracts us while we are pursuing our research. But then there's a way to kind of bring both of them together, and that's what is multimodal anthropology as well, right? So first is social media have become a means of research, forums where research and scholarships are formulated, negotiated, and organized. Second, social media has become the site of collaborative media production, places where media have flowed between anthropologists and communities, the communities whom they are researching on. These processes defy that of authorship, right? Who is the author? Because when something is on social media, then authorship becomes problematic. Finally, social media, by definition, supports forms of dissemination that are simultaneously reproduction through remix, recontextualization, and the secondary production of added media content. Students, please answer this question. Ethnographic films are primarily concerned with A. Fictional storytelling, B. Documenting wildlife in their natural habitats, 3. Capturing and representing cultures and societies, D. Analyzing only political events and conflicts. The correct answer is C. Capturing and representing cultures and societies. Students, answer this question now. Margaret Mead was a prominent figure in which field? A. Literature, B. Anthropology, C. Physics, and D. Medicine. The correct answer is B. Anthropology. This is something very new which has come into the discipline of visual anthropology, but nonetheless, I have made an attempt. On that note, thank you, students.